All right, everybody, we are going to finish our notes. It's actually part 2, and they are on G2B C and D. C and D are really short, and B is not long. So again, this is on regionalization, which is making regions and places. So just to remind you of our starter claim, regional boundaries separate places that are completely different from each other. So our sources are going, and the notes should be able to show that that is sometimes true, but that also that it is not 100% true. And that is our job, is to revise that starter claim and make it much more accurate. So again, our G2 learning objective, excuse me, is to examine the purposes, the characteristics, and the limitations of regions. So that is our goal. And you do have notes for G2A. So on the next available line, please write G2B types of regions. And then just as before, you're going to record the notes on the right side. And you can even draw some pictures if you choose. That might help you. You will have some questions from this later. And then write some level 1 and or level 2 questions, including you could put like what's an example of, to help you process the information. So our G2B is types of regions, and the essential knowledge is that the types of regions include these 3: formal, functional, and perceptual. So again, we're going to record the notes on the right side, and then we are going to write our level 1 and possibly level 2 questions on the left side. So one type of region is called a formal region. Everyone within the region shares a common characteristic. For example, they share the same language, governing body, economic activity. This is usually what we can think of when we think of regions. So for instance, this bottom left map right here, this is a map of physical regions. This is Great Lakes region. So these are states and the provinces in Canada that touch or border the Great Lakes. Here, this bottom right, this is a political region. So we have the 67 counties of Florida, and they are specific boundaries with lines. You know when you leave a county, you know you've left a county because you'll have a sign welcoming you to the next one. Here's another example of political region showing the states that voted Republican and the states that voted Democrat. So they're very formal, they have strict boundaries, and those boundaries are not disputed, they're just understood to be. The second type of region is called a functional region or a nodal region. And this region is focused on a central point or a node that influences or connects an area and radiates out. So for instance, newspaper territory. So the person who delivers newspapers, they have a central location, and then they deliver newspapers around the circumference of that central location. Or a Publix warehouse delivers groceries to Publix within a certain region. So our warehouse in Lakeland would not be delivering groceries to the Publix in Alabama. Or a pizza delivery region. So if you were to order Pizza Hut, let's say, you would not call Sarasota to ask them to deliver your pizza. They are not in your region. Or your zone school. So if you were to not go to our school, if you were to go to your neighborhood school, your zone school, that is a nodal region. So you can see in the image, you have this central location, and then everything radiates from that central location or that node. That would be the region. Our last type of region is called a perceptual region. And this is defined by one's beliefs, perceptions, and or attitudes that people have about an area. Excuse me. So for instance, some people say they live in the deep south or they live in the Midwest. On this top map, this is a region called the Bible Belt. So it is not a formal region. It does not have strict boundaries. So these perceptual regions reflect feelings and images more than actual reality. So for instance, down here on this one, this bottom left, these are Florida coast. So you've got these regions, you see they are just perceptual. There's no specific region for this. If you want to get an overview, this guy, Mr. Sin, he teaches AP Geography, and so this video is like a 4.5-minute video that basically says everything I just said. So we are going to briefly review your sources that you will be analyzing and answering questions in class, and then putting into your source organizer, which will be created this time. So we're going to look at sources 7 and 8, and sources 7 and 8 are about those 3 types of regions. So most people, when they're describing an area that they visited or where they live, most people describe that by perceptual regions, like I live in the South, or I'm part of the Gator Nation, or by functional regions, those nodal regions, so like the I-4 corridor or Tampa Bay metro area. So these 2 sources are going to help us discover how those 2 types of regions, perceptual and functional, differ from the formal regions. So they differ in their specificity. They are not specific. They do not have clear-cut boundaries. And also their shape is different from formal regions. And then also we're going to see how these regions can overlap. So real quickly, you're going to be analyzing source 7. This is a perceptual region. So this map is showing the percentage in each of these states where the people identify themselves as being a Midwesterner or living in the Midwest. So this is all based on perception. Excuse me. Source 8, this is going to be a functional or a nodal region. And so here you have the city of Cleveland, Ohio, this blue car. Here you have the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that red car, and then radiating out 90-minute drive. That will be the nodal region. And you can see that these 2 regions do overlap. So regions are not always specific, defined borders. On your notes, on the next available line, please write G2C, properties of regions. Same thing, we're going to write our notes on the right, write a few questions to help us make sure we understand it. All of this is going to be useful to you. So let's get going. And our starter claim is that regional boundaries separate places that are completely different from each other. Sometimes true, not always true. That's our job, is to figure out which of these sources support or challenge. So G2C is about properties of regions. And so our essential knowledge is that regions vary in scale from local to global, and places can be located in multiple regions. So you're going to record the notes on the right-hand side. So regions can vary in scale. So we can have large-scale regions. So for example, a neighborhood. So remember, large scale is showing a lot of information, but in a smaller area. So it's zooming in. Or you can go to very small scale, like global. So for instance, looking at the sub-Saharan Africa. So this map on the left, a large scale region map showing different information for Pinellas County along the coast, and then also Hillsborough County along the coast. This map over on the left, this would be a small scale map. So this is showing a large area, but not very much detail. So this would be a small scale map. Regions can overlap other regions or be completely separate. So an example of an overlap would be that some say that Australia is in the Asia Pacific region. So this bottom map on the right shows Asia Pacific and also shows Australia with that because it is in the Pacific. Others would say that Australia is in the Western region because of its history with the United Kingdom. So the United Kingdom colonized Australia after it colonized us here in the United States and Canada. So that would be an example of regions overlapping. So you can say that the same place, like Australia, is in different regions. Okay, here we're going to preview our 3 sources very quickly for G2C so that you're familiar with these when we analyze and answer questions in class. So in the present day, most of you are used to seeing nations as having inviolable, meaning unable to be changed, formal boundaries that are rarely contested. So in the oceans, however, we find that those formally declared boundaries that are clear-cut on paper, but they are a little bit murkier in practice, that in the oceans, those boundaries are not, they're fluid, they're not particular and defined. So these sources were selected to help you discover some of the limitations of formal regions. This place ends here and this place starts here, as well as how all space, including the oceans, can be subject to regionalization. So you're going to be looking at source 9, which is an excerpt called Who Owns the Fish? High Seas and the EEZs, and you do need to know what the EEZs are. You will then be analyzing this map, which is a satellite map, and this is also on EEZ, so boundaries of those exclusive economic zones or EEZs for Brazil and Western African countries. So again, we're going to look at how those boundaries are not always formal. And then we are going to be looking at this interactive map that shows shipping channels and cargo ships. And we're going to see how these regions, their boundaries are definitely fluid. Okay, last thing, it's like one slide. So on your notes, next available line, please write G2D, temporary nature of regions. You're going to record your notes on the right-hand side. Try and make a question or two on the left just to help you process. This is all about temporary and subjective natures of regions, meaning that regions do not stay the same, and they also can change due to nature. And so our EK is that regional boundaries are transitional and sometimes contested or overlapping. So here's your notes. So the borders and structures of regions can change over time. So for example, we have changing physical regions due to rainfall, agriculture, or animal habitat. So I chose to give you this map that shows the ice sheet in Greenland in 1992 and then the ice sheet in Greenland in 2002. So 20 years later and showing that change. Or we can have changing and political regions. So for instance, Democrat versus Republican states, political issues. So this bottom map shows how the majority Democrat, which would be in blue, and the majority Republican, which is in red, how those have changed, those districts have changed in Congress in 10 years from 2008 to 2018. And then lastly, we have changes in cultural regions. So main languages spoken, most common religions, types of foods. So this map right here is just showing the percentage change in the Hispanic or Latino population in the United States. So regions are not static, they do change. And geographers try to redefine those regions as events and characteristics evolve and change. Those are your notes. Thank you for paying attention. I will see you in class.